Hi, and welcome to R&R Living Life. We begin this episode at the township of Yulara, a tourist village established in the late 1970s alongside Uluru Katajuka National Park in Central Australia, more than 300 kilometres southwest of Alice Springs. The village has a supermarket, restaurants and cafes, all reliant on regular food deliveries by truck and aeroplane. The caravan park was surrounded by arid plains of red sand and spinifex, where pastoralists in the area raised beef cattle on vast cattle stations. We were looking forward to our day at Yulara, where the spiritual heartland of ancient Aboriginal culture meets the outback's spectacular landscape. The day started off with just a few wisps of clouds, but soon became overcast and showery. Not that we minded. Thankfully, we had made it across the Great Central Road, as not long after we had arrived in Yulara the road was closed. Some of the vehicles that arrived at the caravan park the next day were plastered in mud. Though the morning was cloudy, we spent most of the day dodging showers. But in the big scheme of things, it didn't bother us, as we were here to enjoy the experience, whatever Mother Nature threw at us. It was an amazing day. Raining on the rock, what a sight to see, as the song goes. At 348 metres high, Uluru is one of the world's largest monoliths, towering over the surrounding desert landscape and some 550 million years old. Uluru is a deeply spiritual place as well as a spectacular national formation. This monolith is oval in shape, measuring just over 3.5 kilometres in length and 1.5 kilometres wide, with a circumference of nearly 9.5 kilometres. Made of sandstone with a higher proportion of felspar, the rock changes colour according to the position of the sun and is often referred to as the heart of the red centre. Between showers, we took the Mola walk to a place of great history and an important place for the Aboriginal people. Around the base of the rock we could see into some of the shallow caves that are sacred to several Aboriginal tribes, some containing carvings and paintings. Along the walk were informative signage that told the stories that underpin the Aboriginal culture. The caves and rock formations relate to the activities of the ancestral people during the time of creation. In the beginning, the Mala people came from the north and could see the rock and thought it looked a good place to stay a while and make ima, or ceremony. Creation time is the basis of all Aboriginal knowledge, law, religion, social structure and moral values. When the showers became too heavy, we sheltered in a cave where we reflected on how the Indigenous people lived in such a peaceful and tranquil place, though I could only imagine what it would be like in the middle of summer. We seemed to be intermingling with the landscape. It was quite humbling, yet comforting to be here. We passed the senior man's cave, where they made fires and camped, busily preparing for Ima. From here, men could keep an eye on the bush boys in the cave around the corner and watch out for men coming back from hunting. We ended our walk at the rock pool at the base of one of the waterfalls before returning to the car park. The lower slopes of Uluru have become furrowed by the erosion of weaker rock layers, and as the showers passed, rain began to trickle down from the top of the rock into some of the gullies and basins. I was a little wet by now, not having a good rain jacket to protect me. We then opted to drive around the base of the rock, with the top shrouded in mist or low cloud. It really was an amazing sight to see, even with the patchy showers. Despite the seemingly harshness of the climate, the landscape around the monolith supports a huge variety of flora and fauna, with about 400 species of plants in the national park, including mulga trees, desert oaks and desert poplars, and several types of eucalypts, like centenarian bloodwoods and grevillea shrubs, and dozens of types of wildflowers, including foxtails and myrtles, but we were travelling out of season, so were not able to see them in flower. At the cultural centre near the base of the monolith, we were able to engage with a huge amount of information relating to the Aboriginal culture and where we could talk with traditional owners whose connections stretched back 65,000 years, and where we could immerse ourselves in the Aboriginal stories of this very special place. On returning to Yulara, we stopped off at the town square and did some shopping before returning to the caravan park in Gidget, where we encountered quite a few very dirty and muddy vehicles that had crossed the Great Central Road. I was surprised by the number, especially as the road had been closed the previous afternoon, though I suppose if you are on the road you either stop and wait for it to dry out, unknowing how long you will be, or you plough on through regardless of how cut up the road will get. We had shifted into the overflow part for our second day, but were very disappointed in the cost of just having a place to park up. Then, I suppose, it is a tourist destination. Rick and I spent what was left of the afternoon making ready for a travelling day the following day, but did enjoy reminiscing about what we had seen and just how impressive Uluru was, even on such a wet day, over a cup of coffee. Yes, it would have been nice to see it in full sun, but I think we were quite lucky to see it shrouded in clouds and misty rain, since it is not often that it rains in Central Australia. The following day began very foggy as we left Yulara and made our way along the Lasseter Highway east towards Curtin Springs and Old Thunder Roadhouse, situated at the intersection of the Stuart and Lasseter highways. We were skirting in and out of foggy and low cloud areas, while the dew on the vegetation was stunning as the sun peeked through the clouds in places. It was dazzling, better than fairy lights on a Christmas tree. The red sand dunes beside the road were stunning as well, followed by salt lakes, some covered in vegetation, while others were bare and then open grasslands. For quite some distance we could make out Mount Connor to the south every so often through the gaps between the trees and the sand ridges. The countryside was ever changing from one rise to the next, before we stopped at Curtin Springs, a diversified pastoral and tourist enterprise in Central Australia. What a place to have a homestead overlooking Mount Connor, and their cattle yards were across the road from the roadhouse. Mount Connor, also known as Attila, is a unique 500-million-year-old sandstone peak that stands tall and proud, towering over the surrounding desert plains, at an impressive height of 300 metres or 859 metres above sea level, and for those of us needing to find a comparison, it is roughly the equivalent of the height of a 240-storey building. The flat-topped and horseshoe-shaped monolith with the lower 150 metres covered by scree slopes, while the highest at 90 metres are sheer cliffs. The conglomerated and quartzite formation is about 3 kilometres long and about 1.2 kilometres wide, with sandstone and limestone ridges extending for 2.5 kilometres from its base. From the lookout at the opposite side of the road to Mount Connor was an ancient inland salt lake, a stunning natural phenomenon that added to the region's charm. The lake's surface was coated with a layer of white salt crystals, creating a mesmerizing sight that contrasted with the surrounding red earth and sparse vegetation. Rick and I were captivated by the grandeur of Mount Connor as we stood and embraced the tranquility of the surroundings and reflected on just how impressive it was, especially after seeing Uluru yesterday. Curtin Springs Station is not only a cattle station, but also a wayside inn offering accommodation, refreshments, fuel and private guided walks for those wishing to stretch their legs and learn more about the country around the area. It is a great rest stop for the weary. At 4,164 square kilometres in size, that equates to about 100 kilometres long and 40 kilometres wide. There is a lot to learn about this remarkable place. Making a living in rural and isolated Australia is not an easy undertaking, even when the seasons play in your favour, as well as the uncertainty of markets, heat, flies, bushfires, and the unpredictable weather. not to mention the regulations needed to follow to hold EU and pasture-fed accreditation, or the continual learning to improve not only the herd but the land management needed to preserve a healthy and productive landscape. Living on the land is living with unpredictability. The station runs a composite herd made up of predominantly Murray Greys, with the male offspring being sold mostly straight for slaughter and also to the feedlot market as well. Living on the land, you never know what the next day will bring, and are always ready for whatever the hand deals you. So it is imperative with such a large station to understand the diversity of the landscape, especially the major land types and subtypes, and an understanding of the cattle breeds that best suit the land you manage. Not only do you need to know about the land, but sometimes you need to be the manager, receptionist, nurse, vet, psychologist, mentor, partner, mother, and a long list of other occupations and positions with varied roles and responsibilities required to live in such an isolated area. We had driven through some amazing country that was constantly changing, so understanding the land is really important. I have read that the station relies solely on native grasses and vegetation across the entire 1,000,000 acres, and being a wildlife corridor, any weeds or feral animals are dealt with immediately. With no surface water, water supplies are pumped to the surface, stored in tanks and provided to animals by way of troughs, which allows for trapping of cattle when mustering. A one-way set of traps freely allows cattle to water, but restricts them from leaving yards if they are being mustered. Otherwise, the gates are left to allow free access to the water. The clouds and isolated showers today have made for some interesting landscapes. I take my hat off to the owners who have also decided to diversify into the tourist industry, only adding to the pressures involved in living in such a unique area. I was surprised and unhappy, if not embarrassed, by a tourist's comment about the state of the toilet block, but then again, I suppose not everyone realises that the area was flooded earlier in the year, and it is not economical to replace water-stained walls just to make it look nice. Then again, I often forget that not everyone has lived in rural areas of Australia and had to deal with the challenges of living there. We passed Mount Ebenezer Station between Curtin Springs and Uluru, a 1,640 square kilometre pastoral lease that operates as a cattle station, bordering other pastoral leases, with the Lasseter Highway bisecting the property from east to west. The property takes its name from the 100-metre peak, Mount Ebenezer, that is found in the Baselow Range. Mount Ebenezer is thought to be named after Ebenezer Flint, a member of the first party delivering supplies for the Overland Telegraph Line in 1871. There was once a roadhouse on the highway, but it was sad to see in very poor condition, and have read later that it is set for demolition. Around midday we stopped at the Uluru Roadhouse, situated at the intersection of the Stuart and Lasseter highways, 1,332 kilometres from Adelaide and 1,696 kilometres from Darwin. Uluru is uniquely located in the centre of the centre, according to some, right at the centre of Australia. Because of the different ways of measurement, with currently 5 points that compete for the title of the centre of Australia, the government has decided the title goes to the middle point of those 5 measurements, hailing Uluru the centre of the centre, different from the geographic centre of Australia at the Lambert Centre, 21 kilometres west of Finke and 12 kilometres north of the Finke Road. Between Uluru and Kulgera, we passed a pair of cyclists heading to Uluru, our 4th pair riding in the middle of nowhere. I am not sure if I fully understand their need to challenge themselves by riding the great distances of outback Australia, having to carry all their supplies and camping gear to set up at the end of each day. Thankfully, they were wearing bright colours so as to be seen from a distance. From Uluru we headed south to Kulgera, 20 kilometres from the South Australian border. In the mid-1800s, the growing cities along Australia's eastern and southern coastline were remote outposts of the British Empire. A telegraph line that stretched across the continent and linked to an undersea cable promised to lessen the isolation. By 1870, South Australia was committed to constructing a line that was to extend between Adelaide and Darwin, with the main path chosen close to the path taken by Charles Stuart, who had successfully crossed Australia 8 years before. Charles Todd, Superintendent of South Australia's telegraphic network, masterminded the survey and the construction of the line. Many rivers, towns and roads reflect the names of Todd, his wife Alice, and many surveyors and contractors engaged in the construction of the line. We had passed the remains of some of the galvanised Oppenheimer posts that held the wire known as the OT or Overland Telegraph Line. Repeater and maintenance stations constructed along its length, some becoming a string of towns along the track. We had visited the telegraph station at Hamlin Pools, with an extremely interesting history of the telegraph line, as well as the ghostly remains of the old telegraph station at Eucla, with little more than a few old stone walls protruding from the moving dunes. After we had set up Gidget and had lunch, we drove across the border into South Australia, spending time at the border taking the obligatory photos of being in two states. I never get tired of the countryside. There is always something that stands out, even if it is only a trig station or a survey marker, or even just a rocky outcrop that appears out of the vast sweeping landscape. That evening we treated ourselves to tea at the pub before retiring for the evening as the weather cooled down. Today has been a combination of ancient and vast salt lakes, different land types, each with their unique features and topography, mountain ranges, ever-changing vegetation, and the stunning Mount Connor that is one of the standout places we have seen on this trip. As we have found, the intricacies of Mother Nature play a constant and fascinating, if not ever-changing, day-to-day experience. We have been on the road for nearly 4 months, and each day has been interesting. Once again, the colourful sunset is just another example of just how unique and wonderful this country is. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you have. Join us next time as we visit Finke, the Lambert Centre, and make our way back past Arunda to Alice Springs, stopping to check out the Cannonball Memorial near Stuart's Well on the way. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, living life.